Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another Axel 72 video, and in today's video I'm going to be giving my reaction to Emanuel Navarrete winning via stoppage in round 8 versus Charly Suarez. And so if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so, like video if you do indeed like video, and let's get straight into this. So it was a controversial stoppage to say the least, and it was one in which, you know, it's difficult to. It's kind of like it reminds me of a Usyk Dubois situation. It's very thin margins, and you could perhaps have debates kind of going either way, but for the most part, there is the want for a rematch. And to be fair, I think in this case there should be an immediate rematch put in. It seems like the commission are gonna make it a no contest and order an immediate rematch. That's what I want to see personally. I think the fight was definitely going out in Navarrete's favour. I think he didn't want the fight to finish any much more so than what Charly Suarez did. I mean, Suarez didn't look out of the fight. He was definitely having his own success. I think he overreaches with his punches quite a lot, which typically isn't a good thing to be doing, but the way that Navarrete fights, by the fact of him doing that quite a lot and, really extending his punches, it's not a bad thing to kind of match that. And, Suarez was having bits of success at times. It seems like Navarrete was, able to back him up and hurt him at certain occasions. And to be fair, it seemed like Navarrete definitely came out to fight. Like I said in my prediction, we often see different variations of Navarrete in which, sometimes, especially against contenders who are unknown and perhaps aren't going to be the biggest of on paper challenges for him, and haven't achieved crazy amounts, he does overlook seemingly, and he doesn't fight his best, and he does end up fighting a bit inconsistently. But he definitely was bringing the entertainment. He was bringing the all action firefight in which fans love to see from Navarrete, and he was having a lot of success. When it came to that shot, though, that was, ruled a head clash and caused the fight to be stopped at the end of round 8, in my opinion, it seemingly was the case, like everybody seems to be agreeing with now, that it was a punch slash a slight kind of glaze of the glove alongside a graze of the head that caused the cut. So, the punch was landed by Suarez. It was a nice punch that landed for sure. Did that cause really much blood to start? Possibly. It's very difficult to be able to find any sort of angle in which we can properly see if there was blood coming from the face of Navarrete just from the punch alone. But then the head kind of grazes Navarrete. It's not a solid head punch, a head clash. I mean, I've seen much worse. And it looked like there wasn't really much speed behind the head clash either. Again, we've seen some head clashes in boxing which have been horrific, where, it is two guys just going straight head to head at pace, and you can see the damage, the clear damage then. But it was a kind of graze of the chin from Charly Suarez onto Navarrete's head, and then afterwards there was a little bit of a graze of the other hand from Charly Suarez, and yet again, that is arguably a punch. It was, like I say, a slight graze, and that wasn't intentional, the afterwards bit, but that seemingly did for sure help the blood to be spurting out that bit more, and inevitably, did lead to the stoppage. It's unfair that the fight was stopped when it was, because Charly Suarez definitely still had it in him to turn the fight around. So that's why I do believe that it needs an immediate rematch. Yes, Navarrete can say that he was winning the fight, that's what the scorecard said, and the technical unanimous decision going in his favour. But if a rematch is ordered, then he has to take the rematch, and hopefully we'll see it get ordered. I think it still has the makings to be a really good 12-round contest. It seemingly was the case that Suarez, of course, like I said in my prediction, had worked so hard to get to a position where he was in there to fight Navarrete. So, he wasn't going to let that opportunity go lightly, and he looked like he was going to slug it out right to the very end, and inevitably it was a good fight and a good scrap. And so, hopefully we'll see it again. Hopefully we'll see the same version of Navarrete again, because, like I say, the way that he was extending his punches was having lots of success. I thought he might find it more difficult against Suarez's tight guard, but for the most part, even when he was using his jab, he was able to get through. And yeah, it was a very entertaining fight. fight, like Navarrete, like I say, is normally in, but it did end controversially. And, you can't go on to send any hate towards Navarrete as a result of this because, it's not his fault that he got cut. I'm sure he wanted to continue. He looked relatively frustrated. And to be fair, the cut was deep, but it wasn't impacting the vision. The blood was going down just along the side of the eye. So I have seen fights go on with worse cuts, and it's just interesting to see the doctor go and get involved in the first place, I suppose. But it's not one of the cuts in which you can really debate too much, I suppose, the fight getting called off. But still, like I say, hopefully we'll see the rematch next, and it dampens a bit of a good win there for Navarrete. But nonetheless, like I say, I'm sure I'll make it for another entertaining fight. And like I say, it showcases that Navarrete is still fighting at a good level. Moving on to speak about a couple of other fights in the card, Raymond Muratalla won via unanimous decision to become IBF interim world lightweight champion versus Zaur Abdullaev. I think that Muratalla looked mainly pretty good in this fight. I mean, I loved his hand speed. I think the way that he's able to follow off his jab to find the straight right is a really nice, punch combination in which he throws, and he is able to have success with that. And I think that's where he charges a lot of his power. He had his uppercut going, which was nice. I hadn't seen that too much in his high level opposition opponents and the fights he's had against them. In recent times, so that was nice to see that he was having success and doing well with that. Abdullaev didn't do a crazy amount, to be fair. That was that impressive. He stayed in the fight and he kept having his moments at times and he didn't look out of it. But for the most part, Muratalla did dominate. I think the scorecards were relatively wide and that was expected. I got my prediction right with that one. And inevitably, Abdullaev did kind of disappoint, in my opinion, because he was coming after, yes, a little while ago he had the loss at Haney and that was quite a bad defeat. But he then was on a really good run out in Russia and was having a lot of success there. And I thought, possibly he could come and cause an issue to Muratalla, who, as shown in that fight, Muratalla does definitely admire his work. And that's where he did get caught a few times by Abdullaev when he was really just kind of stood there. When he went in for the straight 1-2, sometimes he just wouldn't bring his feet back to where they needed to be. And that's when he could be off balance. And like I say, just admiring the shots in which he was landing. So, there's definitely things to work on. I think it was a good opponent to become IBF interim champion. For who he's going to fight next, realistically, it's going to be very difficult to see a way in which he's going to fight Lomachenko unless he gets really ordered by the IBF. But the thing is, I didn't realise that Lomachenko had until I believe October 9th to decide if he's going to keep fighting or not, and go for his mandatory defence, which would be Muratalla. And the IBF have been very keen to order fights against other world champions in the past, so maybe that's the way in which Lomachenko could go on to fight him. But to be fair, I think at the same time Lomachenko could vacate his IBF belt, go on to fight another world champion without, any problems. So he could realistically fight any world champion that he wants instead of taking that mandatory defense. Or he could retire. He's having his injuries. He's having, I don't necessarily know where his head's at if he's wanting to come back and fight again. So, it would be a shame, but he has achieved so much in the sport already, then it wouldn't really surprise me too much if he doesn't fight again. And I definitely don't think a fight like a Muratalla would bring him that much, excitement, that much of a want for him to fight. And so we'll have to wait and see what he goes on to do. But there's definitely some really good young top ranked fighters, like an Abdullah Mason, like a Keyshawn Davis, who could go on to fight, with Muratalla at some point and fight at a big level, big stage, big name kind of fights, and that could be great fights as well. One more fight in which I wanted to touch upon was Giovanni Santillan versus Angel Beltran. Santillan won via unanimous decision. I think it was a good solid performance by Santillan. I really enjoyed, when Santillan fought Rocha. I think that was an excellent fight for Santillan. He looked ruthless. He was just really punching Rocha from pillar to post and destroying him by the end of the fight. And he just, that was a fight in which really brought the eyes to Santillan for everybody. And he looked really good in that fight. But, since then, obviously he got stopped versus in his last fight against the champion. So, it's not been the best of runs for him recently. And, he needed that bit of a comeback. And he's now had that versus Beltran, who isn't really a crazily big level opponent. But he didn't look, crazily amazing. I think his hands were a lot lower than normal. I think he was getting a lot more tired. I don't think he looked amazing for the weight. I think he looked a lot slower. I think his ruthlessness has kind of gone out of him a little bit with at least the punches in which I saw in that fight. Yes, he was still making it entertaining. Yes, he was wanting to fight in close. That's his style. But like I say, it just didn't look anything too impressive. It didn't really set the world alight. Do I think he'll get a world championship opportunity anytime soon? No. I think the welterweight division is becoming more interesting with more names from the lightweight, super lightweight division moving up in the monks of a Devin Haney now looking for an opponent. Ryan Garcia, yes, he lost, but he's still in and around. Roland Romero as well, is he going to drop back down? It's more interesting. Tiafimo talking about going up to the welterweight division. So I don't think Santillan will go on to fight something like Norman Jr. again, or any of the other champions anytime soon, unless he gets in a position to get ordered, which I don't think he's really in at the moment. So he's going to keep ticking away with fights and probably keep fighting on undercards. But for the record in which he has, he definitely could be fighting big 50-50 fights against other top contenders. It's just if he really wants to do that, which maybe that'll get the fire back up in him again, but we will have to wait and see. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you did, like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.